welcome. Bob already did the introduction, so I'll hold off on doing that. Appreciate you taking the time today. I'm going to take you through this, not a new product from DiGiCo, but somewhat new in our industry in our terms, a product called the Fourier 4. This has been an interesting product for us lately. We've done a lot of designs, and we seem to be at a point in time where a lot of people are looking for renovations and looking for new ways to tie different spaces together. And with COVID, the requirements to move audio between spaces has really increased. So this is a perfect product for something like that, especially if you have DiGiCo consoles or you're looking to upgrade or want to be future-proof for those kind of things. So I'm going to take you through a bit about the processor here, some of the I/O boxes and control panels, and then we'll have a look at setting up the software and making it work. And I'm going to talk about a couple of examples that we've designed through today as well for a few venues in Ontario here. And I mean, a good chunk of this presentation is some of the challenges with designing a new space like this and dealing with this audio, but also doing it in such a way that it makes it as friendly for the users and the staff and the technical people as possible. So we're all used to repatching and reconfiguring things, and a device like this lends itself to minimizing that where possible. So some of these will be familiar for a few of you on the call, so don't hesitate to jump in. So oh, that's the wrong one there. It's my lovely software here. There's my slideshow. So most of you know I'm Jeff. I'm your webinar aficionado today. We're talking about the Fourier 4. So Fourier 4 has been out for about 3 years now, and it's grown in its capability over time as DiGiCo has come out with new cards and new capabilities and expanded its reach and control protocols and whatnot. Basically, we have the ability to bring in 256 channels of audio via network, as well as 256 outputs. We also have an additional 256 I/O via our DMI card slots. So if you're familiar with DiGiCo, we have a DMI card slot that handles pretty much any protocol these days. And see if this works as well. There you go. You can see me while I'm blabbing on here. We can also do up to 24 channels of audio, either analog or AES, built into the back of the unit, which we'll have a closer look at. So all in all, we can touch in some way up to 536 channels of audio, all flowing at 96K, which is a very sizable number. You can look at this device as a point-to-point router. I like to think of it as a rack mount mixing console or a console in a box, fundamentally. So of course it does have 128 channels of processing and 48 channels plus a few additional solo buses and things like that for your output selection as well. So on the front side, obviously the unit's rack mountable. We do have a headphone jack for monitoring purposes. They've built in 8 macro buttons onto the front that can be triggered just by pressing. We've got a status indicator, and we do have a front panel network control for easy rack access. On the back side here, which is more of what you can see on this side, we've got another network jack on that side. We have a protocol called A32 that we're going to talk a little bit about, but not really in great depth because it's not super important to what we're doing today. We have a clocking section in the bottom corner, so word clock in and out. So this device can easily become a master clock device for a whole building or for a network. We have 8 GPIs and 8 GPOs on the green connectors here, right on the surface. We've got our 2 power supplies, of course. And unique to DiGiCo, of course, we have our SD rack style of cards. So in this particular case, I've got an 8 mic input card, and I've got an 8 line output card. And this one is blue, obviously, so it's our 32-bit mic pre section. And then, you know, the meat and potatoes of our connectivity is our DMI slots here. So we have 4 DMI cards that that can be placed in of any variety. And of course, we support multiples of the same card as well. So this sample rack has an analog card, a MADI card, an optical rack, and a Dante. Mine today, I have an optical card here and a Dante card as well. So I've got 2 open slots that I could fill with anything else that I needed. So a lot of what we're going to talk about is our Dante connectivity. DiGiCo has done a fair bit of legwork in upping our capabilities with all of that. So one of the big things that you know, we can take advantage of is some existing products and some tie-ins to that kind of stuff. So using our Dante card that we have, you know, we can take advantage of some wall plates, you know, standard boxes that fit into single and dual gang plates that offer us 1 or 2 line or mic inputs. And as well, most of you will know that we actually represent a company called Glen Sound. And this particular guy is a little PoE powered Dante loudspeaker. And if you were on the call last week, we focused on that quite a bit, but this is a great monitoring speaker, a great dressing room style speaker, back of house solution. This guy will take 4 channels of Dante, allow you to select between them on the front, and gives you a volume control as well. So it's great for doing page overrides and kind of priority settings and announcements and things like that. So this is a nice way to tie in third-party products to extend the reach of where we can go with something like Fourier 4. For more modular I/O, we have our 16x8 stage box. So that's what I've got here on the desk with me. This is a really ruggedized throwdown box, got rubber bumpers on the corners, all that good stuff. So this supports full Dante connectivity into the unit, and gain control, most importantly, and gain tracking, of course, which we can talk a little bit more about as we get further along. We also have a very unique panel here. This is our A164 wall plate. And what's unique about this is obviously the form factor. So this guy can be mounted into a wall cavity. But the unique part is that it also has screens here. So if you'll notice above the row of XLRs, there is a screen that lets us do full channel labeling and identification. I can, of course, turn those on and off using the selector button here. And of course, these can change as you're changing a patch or reconfiguring the system, based on a different event, things like that. So very nice and, very straightforward way to, to enable some reach that way. And of course, this is Dante based. Just a quick glimpse at some of the DMI cards that we can put into the frame. These are the 16 different cards that we have available. So anything from MADI to Dante to AES to analog. Obviously, optical in our situations today are going to be the most important ones. And not all of these make sense. There's some of these aren't necessarily ever going to go on a frame like this, but our world as far as these DMI cards is growing, and one of the things that's coming next is a DMI AVB card. So the next introduction you'll see is something along these lines. So maybe not exactly called this, but it will be something very much like this. So on the control side of things, we looked at some of the ways to get audio in and out of it natively. On the control side of things, we have our standard network jack that we can tie into. And this gives us the ability to bridge in a number of different controllers. So our simplest and smallest is our A-Control 1 unit. So this is a dual purpose unit. So the push button, the rotary is actually a push button as well too. So this can be used for doing a volume control of a dedicated source, but an alternate function is pushing and turning to give yourself a source selector as well too. So you could push, pick a different source, and then of course you'd have access to the volume for that source. And like anything, these guys are all PoE powered as well. So we can actually, there is a limit to how many of these you can have, but for the A control one, you can have 32 of these plugged into the system as a whole. For something a bit of a step up is our A Control 6, which is actually what I've got here in front of me. So this is a 6 rotary controller with full LCD screens. It actually has 6 banks down below. So those buttons on the bottom section are our bank controllers. So I can do basically 6 pages of 6 different options. And of course, because this is fully configurable, I can configure these buttons above the screens to do a certain function, and the ones below the screen to also do a certain function. So I've programmed a few different options here for today, but you know, normally these would be our solo and a mute if this was an input channel, but we can override that and do different settings as required. So. And again, this guy is PoE powered. I'm just running it off the wire today. So that all fits into the same world. And then for larger applications, our A Control 8. So this is 8 physical faders. These are DiGiCo faders. This basically gives us 8 times 6 different layers as well, and the same kind of programming and everything that way. So this is PoE powered. It does require a PoE plus switch. Most of the larger ones these days are PoE plus capable, but just keep that in mind. The other 2 controllers will run off of just standard PoE, but this guy is sizable, so it does need the plus variation. And in any of these 2 scenarios with the A Control 6 and the 8, we can have 16 of each of those controllers programmed on. So we can do up to 32 of the single gang ones, and 16 of each of these guys, all in one particular system. And then as a way to grab remote control of different things, or to provide some remote control at a distance, we have remotely locatable GPIO boxes. So over that network connection, we can drop down a GPIO module like this guy, and that gives us an additional 8 inputs and 8 outputs that we can put basically anywhere over the standard building network. So keep in mind, this network is just control-based. It's just standard TCP/IP connectivity. No audio is actually flowing, you know, in these connections, so we don't require any special switches or anything like that to at least deal with this portion of the control side. And one of the nice things too, we have a full iPad app available, and this allows us to do remote control of specified zones. And of course, we do support laptop control as well. So for administration purposes, but also we can support multiple people tied in and connected at the same time. So now, some of you might ask, I mean, I probably could have covered this earlier, but you might ask where the name came from. The name is technically Fourier, and it's meant to designate 4 area control. So the fundamental premise behind this box, even if that's not necessarily what you're going to use it for, is to give access and allow you to segregate control and zone a system into 4 areas. You know, and that area could be a main space, it could be a studio space, you could have a rehearsal studio, you could have a cafe, and this box would allow you to segregate channels, buses, and control between all of those different zones. So you can keep it wide open. You can use 1, 2, 3, or 4 of those spaces. You can overlap things, but fundamentally, we do have the ability to zone it into those different groups and only give access to those certain channels to certain people. So something we'll have a look at on the software shortly here. One of the unique things that I like, and don't mind my spelling mistake there, but one of the unique things that we can do is something called tie lines. And Obviously, we can process 128 channels of audio and over 50 mix buses. But another thing that we can take advantage of, especially with all the I/O capabilities that we have available, is basically matrix routing the audio. So if I need a signal to come into the system, I don't necessarily need to process it or do anything with it, and I want to send it off to another location. We can use something called tie lines here. So in this particular situation, you'll notice that we have our output selection across the top here, our different cards, and then we have our input selection here. So I can pick an input, pick an output, and I can create some cross points between those two to link the tie lines. As well, this is kind of a neat feature, is that a system like this can commonly get used in the background audio and a paging type application. So we do have the ability to load in WAV files to be played back on cue. So we basically have 3 gigabytes of space available. As long as we don't exceed that with multiple files or any one file, that can be loaded in and played back at any time. So in this particular instance, I've added a one of our IVR greetings from our phone system here in, and I've triggered that based on one of the buttons on the front panel of the unit here. So by pressing that macro button, I can trigger that playback. So if you do door chimes, or show will go back in session after a break in 5 minutes, you can trigger those to be played out on cue. As well, not often talked about, and I find that they've kind of buried this feature a little bit, but there is an auto mixer built into the Fourier 4. So we can actually auto mix up to 64 channels and have access to it. So this gives us the ability to either have 1, 2, or 4 groups of auto mixers, and we can designate how many channels we want to go into that. So you could have just 1 group with up to 64 inputs, or 2 groups with 32, or 4 with 16 each. So however you want to use those channels to make up the 64 is what you can do.
Hey, Jeff, there's a question. How many channels or tracks can be played at one time?
Referring to the audio playback, I assume? That's a good question. I'm not sure if you can simultaneously do more than one playback. We're typically, the track playback is typically just a 2-channel setup, but you can change that on the fly based on the snapshots and the triggering or the cues that we can set up here. So, but let me double check on that. I'm not 100% sure. So we can't play back more than 2 channels at a time from one source, as far as I know, but we could change that on the fly depending on what was required. So don't know if that answers your question at all, but.
Yep, thanks, Jeff.
One of the things we're going to show a little bit today is one of the situations and scenarios that I wanted to look at. This particular box, it's not a DiGiCo product, but it's something that we've interfaced with a fair bit lately, and we've been using in some of our designs. And it's something made by Optocore that works with our DiGiCo consoles, and something called an auto router. And in our traditional networks, DiGiCo is based on a ring network topology. So there's an A and a B port on each device, and you connect the A to the B, the A to the B, and so forth to create a redundant ring. The benefit with this, of course, is that the ring can be broken at any point, and you'll still maintain your audio connectivity. But in some situations and in larger installations, trying to create and maintain a ring is very difficult, especially when you have devices that get used one day but might be off the next day, and that whole thing is changing. Up until now, the only real way to deal with that has been to patch, to basically put a jumper in across a device that might not be used so that the loop maintains itself. The auto router is our solution to that, and that allows us to bring home runs from each of the optical devices to the auto router And this does the switching for us. So it basically turns that the ring network into a point-to-point or star-based network, but still maintaining the redundancy aspect. So we're running a pair of lines to each of those locations to do that. So these boxes are scalable. So they're sold in basically how many destinations, 5, 10, 20 destinations you require. And as devices are brought online or taken offline, the auto router will automatically recreate the loop so that regardless of what you have online, you still have a fully redundant loop between all of your devices. So we're going to talk a little bit about a scenario where I think the Fourier 4 has a good place. And for Tom on the call, you'll recognize this. This is something based on something we're working on at the Riverrun Center, but not a super obvious one. So one of the interesting situations and the problem that they have is that they have a nice complement of DiGiCo consoles already. They have 10 plus locations, console locations and audio locations that they need to deal with. They have multiple mix positions per space that they want to interface with in a given case. And we don't always have the most, I don't want to say novice users, but they're not always the same group of people patching and adjusting things all the time. You know, we wanted to come up with a way and find a solution that allows us to not have to repatch in any of these situations, or to minimize the amount of repatching required and jumpers and things like that. And as well, I mean, the main driving force was to be able to share audio between all of these spaces and handle all of this kind of stuff while taking everything else into consideration. So in this particular space, there's a main stage. Currently, there's 2 SD7 consoles. The option of potentially having a booth console and tying in a few optical racks, you know, is a normal occurrence. That is done using our Optocore protocol. So that's all fairly straightforward. There is a studio space as well. And again, a few console positions, another set of racks. And, you know, at this point, we basically need an intelligent way to tie all of these spaces together. So the Fourier 4 becomes kind of a nice centralized and common point between these two locations. So basically what we can do is, using the optical interface that we have in the Fourier 4, we can bridge onto the optical network as a device. And this allows us to basically patch into the Optocore network and grab audio and put audio onto the network. But in this case, it gives us a nice way to shunt audio between the two spaces while keeping them separate. So there's many different ways this can be done, but in this particular case, this is one of the instances. And then using the Control 8 panels, we have the ability to give lighting and a stage manager the ability to dial in different levels for a mix, control for follow spot operators, a lobby section in front of house, crew room, a couple of other spots for the studio as well. And then backstage, you know, this is an interesting solution for dressing rooms. So in some spaces, a lot of the stuff is manned by the security desk and dealt with that way. So in this particular instance and for this situation, we've given the option to provide the security kiosk with a Control 6 so that they can actually have overall level control of each of the dressing rooms. So you'll notice there's a Control 1 in each of the dressing rooms for overall level control, but this can be overridden by the security kiosk. As well, he has the ability to modify and adjust what sources are going to each of these locations as well. So that's kind of a neat option there. Oops. And one of the things I want to draw some attention to is this kind of setup here with the with the front of house, the monitors, and the booth audio. So in a lot of cases, you may have a front of house location, but in a lot of cases you don't always have the need to, say, boot up the SD7 for two mics, two mics and a piano, or a singer and a piano, or a duet or something like that. So using a booth console, makes a lot more sense in these cases. Using the auto router, we can feed all of these consoles and all of these devices into that. And in a case where I'm not going to use the front of house console, this guy gets turned off. But the booth console being on, the auto router repatches around the front of house console and allows us to keep our network redundant, but not have to do any physical repatching. The same goes for if I'm not using a rack one day or anything like that. And in this particular case, we have the option of bridging the two rooms together on the same optical network, and that's kind of as it is shown. So we can fully shunt audio between the two spaces using the optical card. But I would also have the ability to have a secondary optical card in here as well. And what that would do for me is I could have one optical loop for just the main stage, and I could have a second optical loop for just the studio space. And then I use the Fourier 4 as my intelligent means for tying those spaces together. And the one benefit of doing it this way is that with the optical loops being separate, somebody making a change on the studio side wouldn't affect what's going on the main stage, and vice versa. If they're all on the same loop, adding or dropping a rack is obviously common to the whole space. So, which is in some cases, in many cases, not an issue, but to have complete separation and control of that separately, having a second optical card in the Fourier 4 gives us that capability as well. Because we have a 14 rack limitation and a 10 console surface limitation in each optical loop, putting all of the devices together in some cases can exceed that. If I was to have front of house monitors and a booth console, front of house monitors and a booth console here, we would theoretically be above the 10 console limit, taking into consideration these dual engine consoles here as well. So keeping them separate allows us, gives us, 10 consoles on this side, 10 consoles on this side, and keeps the network itself segregated. And secondly, and just as importantly, the question of okay, so the SD11 is powering us today, and I need access to the rack outputs, and I need to feed the PA, and all of this kind of stuff, and how to deal with that. The Fourier 4 becomes a nice solution to handle those situations, because in our case, we make this box the common denominator between the whole system and the whole space. And in these situations, we actually feed the PA, we can feed the PA right from the Fourier 4. So this gives us the ability to have front of house, have access to output channels on the console, the SD11 to have access to it. We could also wire up a guest console, and they could be active all at the same time, and potentially using a Control 6 or a Control 8 or a laptop or an iPad, we could selectively decide just on the fly which of those consoles is actually being active. This is a really nice solution for those situations where you are switching between a front of house and a support act and a guest act, because you can keep inputs like an MC mic or a walk-in music or CD player or anything like that. They can stay active through the Fourier 4 while you're changing out and unpatching the console or patching over to the secondary console. So otherwise, there's some reconfiguration. In Optocore world, we would have to release inputs and then make them available to another surface to have access if we were going to try to do that just on the surface. So this becomes a really nice and easy way to tie that all together. Does anybody have any questions on that? That's a lot to think about, but I'm hoping I explained that in an easy way.
Hey Jeff, we have a question from Tobias. Can you cascade multiple Fourier 4s?
You can, absolutely. So We don't have a mechanism for making them 100% redundant in the way that they would intelligently mimic each other that way, but there's nothing stopping you from having a second Fourier 4, linking them together and controlling them using the same mechanism, using one for a fallback or for additional channels as required. So no issues there. We could do that either by the optical or by Dante or anything along those lines. Another one, I know Andrew's on the call today. This is a kind of a unique example. This is not a theater-specific setup, and I'm not sure how much of this you can see, but this is kind of another unique, simulcast / webcasting setup using Fourier 4 and some of our ClearCom products, actually. So, since COVID started, Bespoke AV in Toronto has kind of pivoted in what they're doing, and they've created basically many different control rooms that are all independent from each other, but share, a common audio backbone. And that common backbone is Dante, of course, and the Fourier 4 system. So you'll notice each of these control rooms here is equipped with a number of Dante-based audio devices. We have a couple Glen sound boxes. Whoops, sorry about that. Glen sound boxes here, and then we've got a Control 8 for overall control in each of those spaces. So all of that audio is fed back via Dante into the Fourier 4, mixed, processed as required, and also shunted back and forth between an SD12 that's also on site, as well as into our ClearCom system using one of our ClearCom Eclipse Dante cards to feed the production side of the suite. Andrew, I don't know if you want to say a few things. If you've got a minute, you're welcome to tell us what you think, sir, or correct what I've done.
you hit the nail pretty much right on the head. So it's basically 4 identical control rooms in this particular layout. They each get their entire processing done by the Area 4. So they don't have a dedicated audio operator for those rooms that's handled by one of the video people in that room. And for 95% of the time, it's set and forget. Push up a fader or unmute, and it goes to the webcast and gets fed back to a presenter call. The SD12 is there and configured on a macro on the Area 4 to then take over the processing duties of any one of those 4 suites if they get out of the sort of neat painted box that we've given them and need to change things, or it's a more elaborate system than what we've designated as a medium control room, which is what these are, will allow. And then that sort of takes over the output as opposed to the integrated Area 4 processor to the Glen sound box. That's the final distribution out to the world. And then like Jeff said, it's also integrated into our ClearCom matrix for all of our talkback and distribution of program audio and things like that.
Very cool, thank you. And what do you find yourself using these throwdown boxes for most commonly?
Generally speaking, it's anything outside of the ordinary. So we try and keep these rooms as static as possible as far as what they are and what they're capable of. And we'll push people into a larger room that has, it's not necessarily a more flexible setup. It's just they'll have a dedicated operator. So I give them a full console to work on as opposed to a Surface.
Yeah.
So when we run out of those rooms and we have to press these medium rooms into doing a bit more than the static, pre-built thing. So it's, adding extra destinations because it's now multi-language, integrating a third-party provider's video conferencing tool rather than using something that is like software-based. So we've had lots of people come in with like the Cisco codecs or Skype boxes or things like that, because that's what their workflow is. So that allows us to sort of integrate their system into that particular control room without interrupting what already exists in that room. So it can be easily reset the next day, or potentially have one show for that particular more complicated client day 1, and then have something in the middle for days 2 and 3, and then go back to that show day for that day 4 in that more complicated setup again. just by flipping back and forth between presets. So it's all over the place, honestly. It's meant for flexibility more than anything else.
Great.
We
Well,
also use
cool.
the Area 4 to act as a little bit of a Dante domain manager, in a sense that very early on we decided we were going to use different VLANs for different control rooms. And then we got to the point where we weren't willing to deploy Dante domain manager and the cost associated with it to get things between intercom in a Dante world and one of those other VLANs. So we've added an additional DMI Dante card to the Area 4, and it's basically acting as that bridge between one Dante domain and another.
Absolutely, and that's something I've seen a lot of lately. We have specified some of our orange box product, which is almost basically half of this box here, basically a 2 DMI card slot, as a way to bridge Dante worlds together. And I think we're at a point now where there's enough Dante devices out there that it warrants a network A and a network B, and having some audio flowing between them. But not having them all together on the same setup. So using whether or not you're using any of the processing inside the Fourier 4, you could literally just use tie lines between those. And I don't know if that's what you guys are doing, but you certainly could.
That's exactly it. It's using that tie line module.
Yeah. We could just shunt the audio between them, and that's really not even using any of the processing or any of the other capability between the inside the box. So that's kind of an extra little bit that could be worked in there, or justified that way. So that's a great call. I didn't think about that. So thank you, sir.
Yeah, of course.
And kind of another final way we can look at this, and Zol, this will look familiar from yesterday, but this is kind of one of the ways we can tie in different systems. It doesn't necessarily have to be DiGiCo, since we support a number of different protocols and platforms. We have the ability to tie in things like Allen Heath or SSL or CalRec or anything like that using our complement of cards. So in this particular case, we're tying in a pair of SSL consoles through a Fourier 4 network, as well as deploying a couple of smaller S-series consoles over Dante. So the SSL consoles tie in via MADI. So we have a pair of MADI cards in there, one for the SSL and one for something else. And then we're using the Dante connectivity to tie in a pair of an S21 and an S31, each with their own stage box, back to the Fourier 4. So these guys obviously can locate and function totally independently with their own audio racks, but via Dante we can share that audio back to the Fourier 4 and have access to it on the SSL, or in the case of this Quantum 3 broadcast console or floater guest console, that could be used as well. So that's another way that we can basically bring all of these different protocols and different systems together. So, and additionally for control, we can tie in a Control 1 and Control 6 and some of our Glen Sound interfaces that we talked about for some of the dressing room and fullback situations there. So kind of a neat way to pull it all together and do a fully automated and controllable backbone. So that's that for the presentation. I was going to flip over to the software now and take you through what that looks like. Is there any questions before I move on to that stuff? Everybody's still awake, I hope. All right. So as we talked about in my situation here, I have a Dante card in here as well that I'm feeding some multi-track audio in, so you will see some random metering showing up. That's definitely from me, and I do have an optical card in here, but I don't have anything tied in that way. So when we boot the software up and control, we're basically given a screen like this. If you're on the same subnet as the Fourier 4, in which case I am, the Fourier 4 will show up here. Interestingly enough, I did some prepping for this yesterday at home, actually, and this Fourier 4 unit's been here for a couple of days, and through an open VPN connection, I was able to see the Fourier 4 and control it directly without using any TeamViewer or remote desktop app or anything like that. So in a proper VPN connection, you can do remote control of this out over the internet. So I did a good chunk of playing around and prepping for this, sitting in my basement with this unit sitting on the table here, which is kind of cool. So some of the basic discovery features aren't there. Obviously, a lot of that stuff is blocked over a VPN. But if you know the device IP address and these guys themselves, it is it's not hard to get that to function. So definitely lends itself to some remote mixing and remote capabilities that way. So so we can see my Fourier 4 here. I have the ability to, I'm just going to disconnect for a second here to show you what it looks like. When you do select it, it shows you what firmware versions and everything that you're on. So we're good to go here. But I have the ability to pull the settings from the unit into the software or go the other way. I'm going to pull in what I've got here and just do that. So I've created a couple of users here. So as I mentioned, the Fourier 4 allows us the ability to segregate the device into different areas. And you don't necessarily have to do that to give access to different areas, but it certainly helps from the programming side. But we have 10 users, an administrator plus 9 additional users that we can set up logins for, and we can give access to certain parameters, certain areas, and certain connections. So there's always an administrator, and that's me in this case, but I've also set up a secondary user as well that you can log in. So this is more to show that, when you do attempt to log in and there are multiple areas with password protection enabled, this is what you'll kind of see as you go in. So I just made the password pretty straightforward, Jeff here, and it will start that. And it's important to note that it doesn't even really connect to the unit until you've authenticated that way, which is kind of a nice thing. So you're not connecting and then blocking at the last step. So it's a little bit more secure. So once you do log in, this is kind of what you'll see from the main screen. So we basically have our channels across the top here, and they're broken up into 6 different banks of channels. So I've got some inputs along this side here, some additional ones that have been unassigned. There's nothing actually here. I've got a few auxes, and the same thing over here. These are just duplicate banks. You'll notice here I do have the ability to toggle between the 4 areas. So I can, based on my user, of course, I can limit access to just an area, but since I'm the administrator, I'm going to see everything today. And then down below, you'll see, unless you're making modifications to the system, you'll see this basic first bank here showing up. So it's basically a larger version of what's up there. So you can select the channels, and then this pane here represents more of the parameters and the setup for all of that. But before we go into that, from here you can flip through the banks and toggle between some of the additional channels here. And you do have full control of faders and mutes and pans and all of that right from this menu here. So got some nice, pretty hot audio here coming in on Dante. So if you click on this section here, this will pop up a more of a setup, a routing, more control of the mechanics of the system. So we have a couple of menus along the left-hand side, preset, setup, solo, and view. But most of what we're going to be doing is looking at everything on the right-hand side here. So this is a dynamic menu. So depending on what you have selected here, you'll have different access to different channels and control and things like that. So so we do have a full metering section here where we can look at all the inputs and all the outputs and see that. you will see the underlying channel that's selected here. So my first channel showing up, I've called it the studio, which is input 1 here. We'll see that, and we'll see the dynamics and everything related to that here. In this section here, we can have a look at, this is metering for the whole system. So inputs, FX, buses, and then the different users that we've set up. So these are user selectable combinations of meters and things like that. So also interesting to note is there is a built-in RTA as well and a signal generator. So the RTA basically tags on to the solo bus. So whatever channels are soloed will flow through the RTA and give you a chance to look at the spectral content of what's there. I'm just going to go through these real quick to show you more or less. I'm not going to get too deep in the software. That'll be a different session altogether, and happy to do so if you're interested. But basically, we have a set of effects racks here that we can dial in. So there's 16 effects racks that we can put preset effects into these slots and patch them in as required. So I've done 2 here just to play around and have a look, but we do have a whole slew of built-in factory effects, reverbs, choruses, de-essers, things like that that you can recall and drop into place here. So and patch as required. A lot of your time will be setting up in the routing page and tying this stuff together. So I showed a quick view of the tie line setup, but this is where we also do our actual tie-in to the input channel setup. So on the input side, across the top is all of the places I can pull audio physically. So that would represent my A32 interface here, my Dante box, or the local I/O here, and then my 4 DMI card slots as well. So in this case, my first DMI card is my Optocore setup here. So I could route from there. My second one is my Dante, which shows up right here. So I have 64 channels by Dante. And as you'll notice, I have those guys routed to the first, in this case, just 14 inputs of the channel. So these represent the actual channel strips in the Fourier 4. On the output side, we take the outputs of the channel strips, obviously, and route as a pretty standard mixer. And you can do, of course, any of those outputs. And then the tie line section, as I talked about as well. So you can pick an output and pick an input, and you can tie those together using this menu here. So in Andrew's case, Dante to Dante in 3 and 4. I could set Dante 3 here, Dante 4 here, and I could draw a line, and that would give me my cross point Dante bridge across the 2 systems, which is kind of neat. I did mention there is a headphone jack on the front panel of this, so this allows you to select, where the source for those headphone audio is going to come from. So.
Hey Jeff, question from Matt Frankish with regards to the playback storage. Can that be expanded or augmented with external storage?
Not that I know of. I believe it's just limited to the 3 gigs that are on board. We can do a fair bit with 3 gigs and playback files, but we do have the ability to do some saving to USB. So it theoretically might be possible, but I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. So I can double check for you. How much storage were you thinking?
No particular number in mind. I was just curious.
Yeah, good question. Good question.
Another one from Tobias. From that control software, can I access multiple units at the same time, or do I disconnect and reconnect?
You would disconnect and reconnect, but I believe you can have more than one instance of this running at the same time. It is Mac and PC based, so you do have the flexibility of control there. But you can only connect to one instance at a time in one instance of the software. But as I said, it's not impossible to have more than one instance running at the same time if you did want to control that separately. Good. Cool. So we've looked at a routing page. We obviously have the ability to do a full complement of snapshots. So we have two ways to do filing. So we have a session manager, which is a overall, just like a DiGiCo console, basically. It's our overall capture of the console. And then we have a snapshot section within that that allows us to do a full suite of snapshot firing, storing, recalling. And we do have a recall scope available for the snapshots as a whole and for the individual snapshots as well. So I can go feature by feature and snapshot by snapshot. So in this particular case, I'm looking at just my Jeff Start snapshot here, and I've got the ability to window that out. So not necessarily channel by channel, but it's in groups of channels, as you'll see. But we can get fairly finite with all of that. So. We also have an intelligent update manager, so we can do group updates, and we can select multiple snapshots and do range updates. Again, very similar to what we can do in the DiGiCo land with auto updating and things like that. We do have a queue list, which is kind of neat. I like this feature because you can basically create these queue lists and store or move common snapshots into them. So it almost lets you on demand reorder the snapshots and fire from a different selection based on a different combination of events or things like that. And I uniquely do have the ability to import snapshots from other sessions. So if I've created a file, that has a baseband setup for me, and I'm starting a new one, but I want to pull some of that stuff across, you can actually bring in and load in snapshots from one session to another, which I think is very cool. And then we do have a global and an area safes, which override the snapshot preferences here. So this is like a global scope in our DiGiCo world, where we can make overall generalizations about what gets recalled when those snapshots are brought back. And that can be specific to different areas as well too. So if you're using the area functionality and breaking it into the 4 groups, we can segregate that so that users can only have access to certain functions if they're making changes within an area itself.
Can snapshots be triggered externally via OSC, for example?
They can be fired externally. We don't support OSC at this very moment in time, but it is on the roadmap as one of the next network-based control things. So we have our GPI connectivity. We have our macro buttons. We also have MIDI over IP connectivity. So we have a full complement of MIDI control over IP that can be used to trigger snapshots. Kind of a sidebar to that is that you can actually use the MIDI control to control a DAW if you wanted to. So you could use a control 6 to represent fader control of a DAW for external control or things like that. So there's a whole other tangent for another day that can be used for control purposes of things like that. So, but OSC is coming absolutely very soon. Into the engine side, just a quick glance at some of this. This is the overall structure of the console. So we do, like our DiGiCo, we do have flexibility in using less auxes or groups and changing up the mono and stereo count there. I have the ability to do global naming and applying mass name changes across ranges. So I can do a start, stop, pick a type and move across. Obviously our networking here. And we do have our user selection here. So this is where we do set up our admin password, a base snapshot to start with, and the associated area that they can go into. So we also have some audio setups as well. So we can look at our DMI card slots. We can adjust our optical IDs, our preferences. So I can see I've got an Optocore card here, and I've got a Dante card here, which is great. And then I do have A32 plugged in. This rack here is an A32 rack, and this is where we also get access to our AMM here. So our auto mixer is set up here, and I've grouped it into set up with input assign with 2 auto mixers that are capable of doing 32 channels each. So this is mixer 1 here, this is mixer 2 here, and I can just drag and I can drop these channels as required to group those 2 into their respective setups. Under this section as well, we have our administration for our controllers. So I don't have any of the little wall mount units today, but I do have an AC6 here and an AC8. So by adding a device here, you can see it populates with a unit and shows up here in the list as a controller, which is great, and my GPIO units as well. So as I mentioned, we can have up to 32 of these guys, the single units, and 16 of each of these in addition, up to 64 controllers max basically is the limitation. So yep.
Peter McBoyle is wondering if you can set priority on the auto mixer.
You can, yeah. Sorry, I'll go right back to that. And audio. So there's a priority level control here. So you've got a weighted control basically of each of these inputs to the overall mix. So if I wanted priority on this guy, I could bring him up in level and respectively, maybe a co-host or something like that to do that as well. This section here is where we build our banks here. So obviously these are our channel banks here. I can drag and drop them to create them. So these buttons here respond to the A, B, C, D, E, and F here on the sides. So as I toggle through, I see a different combination, and I can build channel by channel whatever I want those banks to be, and I can do it in blocks as well too. So I can select a block of channels and move them into all of that. So as I mentioned, there is a macro section on the front. There's 8 macro buttons there. Plus, we also have 16 macro buttons along the 24 macros along the side here that can be triggered separately. So in this pane here, I can set those guys up. And I have a drop-down list of different functions. So this could be a mute group or a specific mute. It could be a solo control group, spill, snapshot control, talkback, MIDI, a custom MIDI message. So we have, as I mentioned, we have full MIDI control of right down to the note and the variants we can put in there. I can do track playback, which is what I've done. So I set up my first macro on the back here to play back that track that I showed you guys earlier. So I can just toggle that button and have that go, or I can modify an AMM command or generate a GPO. So these are preset list with different preferences after the fact. So. And then under the busing section here, we have the ability to quickly assign mixes to buses and things like that. So we can do control group assignments from this section as well. Like the DiGiCo, there's the software looks nothing like the DiGiCo software, but our functionality is very similar in some of the routing and the paths and things like that we can do. So. And then finally, the processing section here gives us access to everything available on the channel strip. So as the selected channel is brought up, we have our gain control, our trim. We can look at our high and low pass filtering here. Our gate, we can dial that stuff. We can do keyed inputs as well. So we can use this to trigger and to filter that gate. Our full EQ section here. So there's 2 insert points, an insert A and an insert B, are fully routable and can be used to any of the slots or the local effects rack. And then of course we do have a delay for alignment and dialing things together. So that's a quick overview of the software and some of the capabilities. What I've done in my setup here is I've got this controller. Let's see what's going on here. Oh. Yeah, so I've reconfigured this controller on myself here, and so I've also toggled that playback button for the event to happen there. Obviously, I've got this guy here is one of my A32 racks connected into the unit based on the built-in audio. So this protocol is not something we would use commonly, but in combination, these boxes come in both flavors, A32 or Dante. But the one nice thing is that the Fourier 4 includes 4 A32 ports, these guys right here. So this rack here is tied into this first port, and this gives me 32 channels of bidirectional audio on that network. It is a network protocol. It will pass through standard layer 2 switches without having to occupy any of these card slots. So if I'm using a fair number of ports, or I've got a lot going on and I need all 4 of these card slots, having 1 or 2 of these racks as local I/O or just convenience audio over the A32 is not necessarily a bad way of doing it. You have 128 channels of audio available on those 4 ports. So in certain cases, it may make sense to use those. So, and this guy is just programmed with my standard, 1-to-1 patch on the actual setup. So I can patch those, and I can label them independently, and I can change the colors as well too. So if I toggle this this button here, you'll notice it cycles through the color set. So these will turn off by default, and you can disable them and give access to. You certainly don't want to have that happening during a show or anything like that, but in a pinch, it's a great and straightforward and easy way to know and feel confident on exactly what you're patching.